It is overtime here again at Old Favorite Friday, and I am with Ralph Renault. We are at Barrel Amongst Brewing, and we are continuing the conversation about another incredible classic beer in the Oktoberfest by Left Hand Brewing. This is a Marzen style beer. I like to say my second favorite time of year. The first one is Christmas. The second one is the time that Marzen's Fest beers, Oktoberfest beers are coming out. It's one of my favorite styles. It is so underappreciated. Big malty lagers with tons and tons of flavor, hopefully well balanced by the hops. And we're now into September, so we can drink these beers and feel good about it. Some of these come out a little bit earlier, and I rail about the creep of these seasons often, but this is one that I don't mind at all. So this is a great beer. This was around, I think in my research, around 2005, 2006 this beer came out, so it's been around for a long time. It's a great example of an American version of a Marzen that a little bit higher, I think, a smidge higher, 6.6%, than something that, I mean, you did a lot of research on this. We just did a Marzen.
A little higher than our BJCP guidelines.
There we go. Thank you, Ralph, for affirming what I thought on the surface. But it's a really, really great beer. It ticks all the boxes for me for a Marzen. It probably is a little bit beefier, a little bit richer, maybe a tad sweeter, but everything's in balance and everything's delicious.
Yeah, and that's the first thing I noticed. It definitely does seem slightly beefed up, which I don't mind because it tends to lend to that body. But what I really like about this, and I don't know if they've said the malt bill or what they do use, but I almost get like, so I love rye bread, and I get almost like a pumpernickel character, where like sometimes when you say bready, there's like different levels. I mean, if it's a lighter beer, it might be crackery, so that term can mean a lot of things, but to this, I get if you ever had like a pumpernickel bread, and then there is, like you said, that sweetness that I would almost call it a caramel, but because of that bread character, it's not like normally what you think of, like with a heavier, roastier beer, that caramel, but they work together really well, where it is almost like a slight holiday bread, but then you do get, the one thing I like about this is I definitely get those hops on the back end. So after you get like all this big malt character, it offsets itself with that nice hop bitterness.
And what kind of hops are you getting out of this? Are you getting kind of the more earthy hops that I'm getting?
Yeah, I would imagine, just from, and I'll take another sip, but from trying this, I mostly get like earthy and grassy, and I don't mean that in any negative connotation, but like what you'd expect from like a middle fruit or a Tettnang. So while I don't know what they use, I would imagine even if they're using some of what they call like American noble hop, I imagine it's something that's supposed to be in that vein. I'm not really getting any citrusy or something that you would equate with some of these new school hops. So.
I mean, you can tell that they're making a traditional style. The Marzen style has been around for a very long time, and you can tell that they understood that and they realized it. They tried to interpret it, but so often one of the great things in beer is that you can kind of do your own little interpretation. You don't have to follow the BJCP guidelines perfectly. You can make the beer that you want to make, and sometimes when we skew out of the margins a little bit, we find a really, really nice flavor profile, a little more body on the beer, maybe a little more sweetness. Not that I mean, I've tried a lot of Marzens, especially by American breweries, that are a lot sweeter than this too. So they can skew in many, many different directions. I mean, I feel like Left Hand's been doing this for a long time. I saw this beer represented in like, the top 20 Marzens on different lists online. So it's a well-respected beer. Left Hand's been around a long time. Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of Left Hand beers in South Florida anymore. We used to get all their stuff. I remember Smoke Jumper, and I remember Sawtooth, and all these great beers that I would kill to do for Old Favorite Friday, but either one, some of them are not in production anymore, or two, we just don't get them here. So it's a real shame. We've done Left Hand Milk Stout before. I love so much of their portfolio, but I love being able to have some beers from Left Hand.
Yeah, and I was gonna say it's actually it's kind of a cool nod, because with a brewery that has been around for a good amount of time, like I remember, like you said, Left Hand back in the day was everywhere here, and a brewery that's been doing it as long as they have, it's cool to see that them kind of sticking with the traditional sense of this. I'm sure they've taken some liberties of, you're really at the brewery, but it's traditional enough where like a lot of breweries, as kind of we talk about it on here sometimes, who've been around for a long time, try to skew more and more now to kind of just keep up with people want. But it's nice because, I mean, if you're going for an Oktoberfest, at least with me, I kind of want that tradition of it. That's part of the aspect I like. So it's cool to see that they didn't like try and go too, like you said, too sweet or too hoppy. They definitely kept it more in a old school kind of vein, which I like.
And so many of the beers, I mean, that's when I fell in love with Left Hand in the early days. They were doing traditional beers and putting their spin on them. I mean, for a while, I mean, the only other nitro stout you could find other than Guinness in the country, it seemed like, was Left Hand Milk Stout, right? And that's an incredible beer, right? And
Yeah.
they do a great job of it. Led the way in that style of really popularizing milk stouts. I know it's not the same thing as a dry Irish stout, but you get what I'm saying as far as the nitro stuff goes. But really popularizing that style. And I mean, if it weren't for Left Hand Milk Stout, would we have the candy bar stouts? Would we have the pastry stouts? Maybe not.
No, because I was gonna say even are they the ones, and I could be wrong, but I thought, didn't they have a creme brulee something they did? I might be mistaken, but I remember back when they were around, I remember a few, now they probably wouldn't be considered pastry by today's standards, but I do remember that like being like, at the time, you're like, wow, this is sweet, or this is some kind of candy or whatever. So definitely agree with 100% with that.
I don't remember what that, and I know now we've gone off the beer of the Oktoberfest, and now we're just talking about how much we love Left Hand and how much we appreciate what they've done in the industry. But it's a really important thing to remember. A lot of these breweries, and the reason why we do Old Favorite Friday is to highlight not just great beers, but great breweries that are continually putting out incredible beers. And when you have an Oktoberfest, a Marzen like this that delivers this kind of quality for coming up on 20 years, it really, it needs to be highlighted, it needs to be respected. When you see this beer on your shelves, if you are like me and you're into malty, amber, brownish lagers, which is just one of my favorite styles, I've said it again, I'll say it 1,000 more times, go pick up a beer like this. I mean, listen, support the classic Marzens that you're gonna see, the classic German ones. There's so many different options. I could do an Old Favorite Friday on a Marzen every single week for the next 6 months,
probably so.
right? If I picked the right amount of beers. So there's a lot of options out there, but if you see Left Hand, I highly recommend it. It's a great beer. It's a nice spin on the style. So please do that. Tell us what we should be drinking for Old Favorite Friday next week. We'd appreciate that. Please poke around the channel, see some longer conversations that Ralph and I are having about incredible beers just like this, sometimes taking a walk down memory lane of our favorite beers as we've been in this industry for a little while. But we'll see you next week for Old Favorite Friday. Cheers.
Cheers.